Good morning and welcome to my latest episode of A Get a Life Moment with myself, Lisa Davis. And I am so pleased to be joined today by Rachael O'Donnell. Rachael, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. So for those people who have not met you yet or haven't come across you yet, who is Rachael O'Donnell?
Wow, okay. It always seems a big question to ask that, doesn't it? Because I think we're all made up of so many different bits. So I suppose I'm somebody who is quite caring by nature, someone who's been drawn to care by profession through experiences that I've had throughout my life.
Yeah.
I think as a profession, I've been a mental health nurse for the last 15 years, which has predominantly been in NHS. A bit of a mixed bag really, most of it within high secure services, and the last couple of years out in the community, which was a completely different experience altogether. And then another change again, sort of around the time of the pandemic, because I'm sure it's been for a lot of people a time of change and evolution. And now I am the owner of Unique Homecare Services, which is a new home care company that we're bringing to the Lincoln area. So yes, a real change, I suppose. It's still within the caring profession, but quite a leap into the business world, which is all new and exciting. But yes, a time of change.
Yeah, and that must be a huge leap actually, to go from an organisation like the NHS into being, I guess, an entrepreneur, a business owner. That's a massive shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge, really. It's brought its excitement and its challenges, really. Because yes, I think working for the NHS, it's an amazing organisation. I would never knock it, because it does some fantastic things. But yes, it's working for a wage, that reliability of knowing, what's coming. And now I'm out there, looking for clients, marketing myself and running a business. And it's a whole new world. It's absolutely a whole new world. But I think, as scary as it can be, and I think things in my life kind of brought me to this point to acknowledge that change is good for us all. And I think sometimes that comfort zone can be an easy place to stay. And I've done that myself for many years, so I understand, how easy that is to do and why people do it. Yeah. But I think that change process, when you're doing it for the right reasons and you've got a passion about it, you've got to really embrace that fear and just go with it anyway. So yeah, it's an exciting time, but a time of constant development, constant learning, and yeah, it's
I know so many people listening will so identify with that. We have a lot of people in business listen to these videos and watch these videos, so I'm sure a lot of people will identify with that moment of stepping out of getting that salary every month to then standing on your own 2 feet and going out there into the big wide world of business. So what has been the journey that's led you to get to this point then?
Wow, I mean, it's been quite a journey. I think everyone, as you meet people throughout your life, I think everybody's got their own journey, haven't they? And it takes them in all sorts of different directions. But I suppose for myself, I mean, I was originally born in Leeds. I think my accent sometimes still gives away my Yorkshire roots, although I haven't lived there for quite a number of years. It's definitely something that stayed with me. And we moved as a family to York. I was probably about 4 years old, and that's where I spent most of my time growing up. And I'd always described I had a very good upbringing, very stable. I was quite very fortunate. My dad was an accountant, and he worked for a big accountancy firm and worked his way up. So we never wanted for anything. My mum, from a very early age, stayed at home, and so we had that consistency of having a mum. But I think alongside that, there was a lot of other events that happened that have shaped how I've developed, how I've come to see the world, how I've come to see people. And I guess one of the first ones really within my life would have been when my little sister Natalie was born. And there was a bit of a gap really, because there was myself and my older sister Lucy. We were only 1.5 years apart. She's my older sister. And then there was a 9-year gap before when we had Natalie. So it was quite new to us all, but we kind of got into that family group, and then we had a new addition come in, but it was really exciting.
Totally new dynamics going on.
Yeah. So Natalie was born, bless her. It was the first sort of few months of her life. Everything was absolutely fine, but then unfortunately, the first sign that there was something not quite right was that she had a seizure. So at this point, we knew, you know, something was happening here and we needed to check this out. So from there onwards really came a barrage of tests and checks just to see what was going on. And it took quite a while, because when they got to the bottom of it, she was actually diagnosed with a condition called Icardi Syndrome.
Right.
Which we'd never heard of, and I don't.
No,
think...
I haven't heard of that one. No, no.
Yeah, it's a genetic abnormality, I suppose, that it doesn't necessarily run in families. It can just happen as a one-off, and it entailed basically that as Natalie grew older, she had quite severe physical and mental disabilities. So she wasn't able to walk or communicate in a way of talking. So yeah, it was something that, as my life, I think, really allowed me to acknowledge our differences, I suppose. And as Natalie grew up, I think for a lot of people who don't maybe have that experience, they maybe struggle to understand the richness of life, regardless of our differences, might be a good way of putting it. And I suppose, you know, as we grew up with Natalie, her pleasures and her experiences came from things that perhaps we take for granted, you know, things that were sensory. You know, she used to absolutely love a roaring fire and the flames flickering, and she used to love Christmas time when there was all the nice, you know, sparkles and everything. And she had and she knew, you know, that there was, even though she couldn't communicate, she had that awareness. It was a long-standing joke that when I'd walk in the room, she'd laugh. And I don't know why. I don't know what about me was so funny to this day. But I think that also shaped a bit of an understanding of the healthcare services as well. So we had a lot of times when she wasn't maybe very well and we were in hospital, we had a lot of support from different agencies, respite carers coming in to support my mum, and it really developed that empathy for the experience, you know, of everybody involved in that process, really, and how difference needs to be seen, not as a disadvantage necessarily, but just acknowledge that we're all different in whatever way it might be, to whatever extremity. And I think, you know, it's something that really helped me embrace that.
It can't help but shape your view of the world, can it? It can't help but, and in a positive way, in such a positive way. Absolutely,
massively. So yeah, I mean, I think in kind of going on from that, really, as I was growing up, I think as a person, I was quite quiet, quite insular, a bit of an overthinker and analyzer, and you know, I wasn't the most confident of girls. I think at that time it was a time of Kate Moss and, you know, all the really slim models and all these, you know, it was that sort of time. There was that sort of image that was coming through in sort of the 90s and that time. And as somebody who was a little bit awkward, a little bit unsure of myself, and, you know, how I was going to fit into the world, I think I'd become quite conscious of my own self-image. I think, you know, I'd probably a little bit, carry a little bit of extra weight maybe, but not excessively. But when you're that age, it can be so self-conscious, can't it? So in my early teens, over a period of time, I became more and more conscious of that, and I went down a bit of a spiral, really, where I started sort of controlling what I ate a little bit more. I think maybe around that time of uncertainty, there was a lot of things around control, and it spiraled out of control, really, without me even realising it, to the point that I was actually diagnosed with anorexia.
Right.
So at that time, I mean, it's easier looking back from the outside now, and I think the learning experience I've got from that is more from looking back, if that makes sense. And I think it gave me an understanding of the complexity of mental health, and how the mind can be such a powerful tool, or it can be so destructive, if that makes sense, when it's not cared for in the right way. And I think there's a thing around people talking about disease or dis-ease, and I think that body and mind connection is massive. And I think at that time, in that spiral, it got to a point where I was so I don't know if delusional is the right word, but I wasn't seeing the world as it was, if that makes sense. So I was seeing myself in the mirror very differently. You know, my weight dropped hugely to, you know, below 5 stone, but it was never enough. And I didn't see that I was, you know, so frail as everybody else did. And my mind became so distorted. And I think at that point, the lack of nutrients, which, you know, makes a huge difference to our bodies and how they function. You know, and it got to such a huge extent that I wouldn't even drink a glass of water. You know, it was so disillusioned and disordered at that point. And and I needed help. And luckily, I got that help at the right time, but it was a close call. And that was a wake up, looking back now to think, hang on a minute, I think sometimes people think with mental illness, and it is changing, but it may be not at the extent that it could, that people have some control over it and they can just snap out of it. But it's not like that. It
No,
really isn't. And I think we need to have that compassion and empathy for each other. And that was a real turning point of me looking back and sort of having that bit of compassion for myself, really, and that then transfers to others. So I had a lot of help during that time, and I look back and I'm so grateful for that help. At the time, I perhaps wasn't, because I wasn't seeing the world very clearly, but I can look back now and think, hang on a minute, wow, that saved me. I guess again, that was a personal experience that built on that experience of the care sector, of seeing things from a different perspective, of having that empathy and to others' experiences. And I say, luckily, I did come back from that. I may not have done, many don't, sadly, but luckily, I was one of the lucky ones who did. So yeah, I mean, my life moved on from there, and I was absolutely horse obsessed at that point. That was what I was going to do with my life. I don't know, we have points, don't we, where we think we know what we're going to do, and that was mine.
Yeah, you're going to be a horse rider, yeah.
And that was my aim, and much to my parents' sort of disappointment, they wanted me to go and do my A-levels, but I was set, this is where I'm going in my life. So that was sort of the first part of my life, really, and it was a great part, really. I mean, I still love horses, but I love that freedom of going out for a gallop, that feeling of I suppose the nature, and just I think animals are so compassionate anyway, aren't they? They don't have
they don't have the same judgments as us humans have of one another. Their love is unconditional.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, my life took me off, and I wanted to go. There's a college nearby, Bishop Burton, and that's where I wanted to go. And the first year entailed a placement year to experience wherever you wanted, really. There's certainly a place you could choose, but there was a show jumping yard in Gisborne, Lancashire way, that was where I'd got my horses from. So I had a horse when I was younger, so it was somebody that my dad knew. So I wanted to go there. I loved show jumping. I'd got my horse from there. I thought, this is so exciting. This is absolutely amazing. So that's where I tootled off to. And despite being a little bit quiet at times, I have been a little bit gung-ho as well at times, and kind of just gone a bit of a contradiction, really.
Headstrong then, a little headstrong at times,
Yeah, that's what I think how it could be described. So yeah, I tootled off there, and I think my parents are the best will in the world. My upbringing was in a little village, and they weren't, I mean, they just tried to keep you safe, really. I think they were worried about the big wide world out there, and I think they expected the people who own the yards kind of be that figure who would look out for me. And I suppose really they gave me a lot of freedoms at that time, so it was a bit of an experience of the world out there, and perhaps from the bad side of the world, and people who don't always have the nicest intentions either. So that then led to another tangent on my life, I suppose, which where the relevance of it comes, because towards the end of my time there, I had quite a distressing experience where somebody tried to take a bit of advantage, and luckily I had the presence of mind to act on that and take myself away very quickly. But it set me off on a little bit of a different path, really. So where I'd always been focused on working with horses, I wasn't really sure what to do anymore. And I'd met somebody while I was there at that time, and that started my journey off to Lincoln. So I'd gone from, I'd only meant to be there for a few months just to sort of see what happened. My boyfriend at the time, his brother was there at university, and my parents very kindly sort of said, yeah, okay, go for a few months, see how you just get yourself settled. And I never went back.
And you've been a yellow belly ever since then?
I have, yes. Yeah. So yeah, it's 16 years old, that was it. And I never expected, and I think I've done that a few points in my life. I think a lot of people probably do, where they look back and they think, how have I ended up here? I never saw this happening. And you're like...
So those pivotal moments, isn't it? Those almost like fated moments where you walk through a door and you can turn left or right, and that's it. It's interesting, isn't it, how you look back at it?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, your life just takes these turns. And for a few years then, because I've been so set on what I wanted to do, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I suppose I had this feeling that I needed to know what I wanted to do, and I needed to set myself a path. So I tried to start my A-levels again, but didn't really get along with that. Did a business course, but again, I didn't really feel the passion for that. But I think when I look back now, I think those years I did a lot of different part-time jobs. They really built me as a person in terms of my
Nothing's
character.
ever wasted, is it? If it's recycled, you'll probably use skills from those days today, and you kind of take for granted that that was kind of the grounding, wasn't it, to it?
Absolutely. I think that comes another lesson in life, doesn't it? Of thinking about, you know, why aren't we enjoying that moment? And as I've grown and I've kind of looked back and reflected on these things, you see it differently, and you think actually it's all part of the journey. It's all part of becoming, you know, who you're meant to be, I suppose, in a weird way. And what seems like it's not the right thing, or you've made a mistake, or you've taken a wrong turn, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just where you're supposed to be, and you just can't see it at that point.
So how did that then take you towards becoming a mental health nurse? I mean, obviously your own experience of care and the whole sort of NHS and all of the support systems with your sister, and then your own mental health concerns with anorexia, I suppose, set you in a good stead to go there. But how did that move you on to think, right, I know what I'll do, I'll become a mental health nurse?
It was just sort of it just sort of happened, really. I think strangely, I mean, as I say, I'd always had that background of care, and then my gran had always said, I think you'd make a really good nurse. So there came this day and I opened up one of the local newspapers that came around Lincoln, and again I was thinking I need to sort of find a path, I need to do something, and I came across this advert for nursing. At that time as well, they did bursaries. So you could go and you could get the bursary to do the training. So whilst I wanted to find an opportunity, you know, it had to be affordable, something that I could achieve.
Yeah.
So I looked at this advert and it just felt like something I should go for, you know, and just saw it and thought, this is what I should try, this is where I should go. And originally I wasn't even sure, because at that point, I mean, you could do your general nurse training, learning disability mental health. I wasn't even 100% sure, and I think it's changed now, but as it was then, you could do your first year, you could do, and you do placements in all different areas, and then you could decide.
Right.
So it left you that freedom to have a think about it, and that. So I started my training, and I went out to all different places, and it just felt like what was drawing me. That was the path. That was what, you know, I felt where I wanted to be, and also at that point as well, I think as I got more involved in the training, with the background with anorexia, that was where I wanted to help. That was my idea, was I want to help people with eating disorders. From my own personal background, I thought I can really bring some compassion and empathy to this. So that was, you know, what my plan was, I suppose. So at the end of the 3 years, we got to choose a placement. And I chose a place called The Retreat, which is in York, and they do a lot around helping people with bipolar, depression, and eating disorders. So I thought that's the perfect place, that's where I want to go. So as life happens, it doesn't always go to plan. So just when I was about to start, I got a phone call to say, unfortunately, you're not able to do this placement anymore, because it was in York. The students in that area got priority, so I had to kind of refigure what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to a placement at a low secure forensic unit in Lincoln.
Right.
Wasn't really sure what I was going to make of it, to be quite honest, because it's never something that I'd considered doing before. But actually, once I started, I thought, I actually really enjoying this. I really think this is an area that I could make a difference. I was really empathetic with people that were there and their experiences, and jobs with in eating disorders weren't that easy to come by either. I think it's quite a specialised sector. So when I came to the point of finishing my training and looking for a job, we'd also had some people on our training who'd been from high secure services.
Right.
So I just had a chat with them as well, really, about their experiences. And again, in this nature of kind of, whilst being quite timid and quiet, putting myself out of my comfort zone at times, there were some jobs that had come up on a new unit. Right. Within Rampton Hospital. So I thought, right, I'm going to go for this because I'd enjoyed low secure, and I thought, this is a level up. I enjoyed this, so actually I'm going to go for this, and I'm going to give it a go. So, I
mean, Rampton, Broadmoor, it doesn't get any more secure than that, does it really?
No, absolutely it doesn't. And I think the new unit as well that I went to, and it shows the power of labels, I suppose. And around that time, it'd have been 2005, although it may have opened just before I started, 2004. The unit that I went to was actually called the Dangerous and Severe Personality Disorder Unit, which sounds it
That
just
sounds
brings with
dreadful, does it?
It
That's
does,
all
doesn't
sorts
it?
of triggers attached to that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It does. It's and then that's changed since, I'd like to add. They've taken that on board and they have changed that that title, I suppose. But it was around the time when there were people who had been released from prison who'd served their sentence, but there was still concerns being raised that there may still be some risk issues here. And then people had reoffended, and there was uproar in the media. Why was this allowed? Why did somebody have the opportunity to do this? So the government, as they do, wanted to put something in place to address this. So that was kind of the background to that unit, really. But yes, I just remember a moment of, in my first few months, being sat there and thinking, how have I ended up here? How have I sat here as a timid young girl, with this, I would have never looked back 10 years before and thought that's where I'd be sat, but that's where life took me. And I look back.
I mean, it must be fascinating to work in a unit like that. With titles like being labelled like that is pretty triggering and scary, but actually it must be absolutely fascinating in terms of understanding the human condition, the vast range of what humanity is capable of.
Absolutely. And I think that time there as well gave me a real compassion for how people get to the situations they are. And it's quite a difficult thing to put aside things that people have done that can be quite emotive. It can be quite difficult. That was a big part of the job. And I think it also, one of the takeaways was in terms of that label personality. I went by, I really found that quite difficult to resonate with, because actually I didn't see it as a disorder, because the people who I was working with often came from quite damaged backgrounds, their experiences in life, there'd been quite a lot of trauma. And I think the personality disorder, as it was termed, and how that played out and manifested itself was actually quite understandable coping strategies that adapted to deal with what was thrown at them.
As a result of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. So working with that trauma to try and understand why those behaviours were showing themselves and why they were coming out. And I ended up working there for 13 years, which is quite a long time, really.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the recommendations at the time were sort of 3 to 5 years with people who are diagnosed with personality disorder. And mainly that's around the fact that there's a lot of projection, I think, from people who are so distressed, and that can take its toll over time if you're not careful. You're on a bit of a tightrope with trying to support people, but not take on board, their hurt and their damage.
Avoid that transference. I mean, and I guess when you're working in a place like that, I mean, I don't know, I can only imagine that, if you're there for a long time, there's a danger of becoming institutionalized yourself, because you are in that very unusual circumstance every day for all of those years. It takes a very strong character and a real professionalism to kind of keep your professional distance. I can only imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I think I did become a bit institutionalized, and you're right, lots of people do. And I think whether that's financially or whether it's in terms of the routine or the habit, and I'd say whilst I took a lot away from it, I think towards the end, it was just sticking to what I knew, even though I knew it wasn't actually serving me anymore, if that makes sense. I probably wasn't giving the best of me to patient group either, because I'd kind of got to that point and doing a lot of changing shifts, so day shifts into night shifts, and the toll that took was huge. And it came to a point really where my body said no. If I'm honest, before my mind could. My mind was sticking to what it knew, and it was sticking to familiarity, and I think my body just said no. And I had a moment of reflection, really, I suppose, that I needed to make a change. I wasn't my best. It wasn't, the benefit to the people that I was working with, and it wasn't a benefit to me at that point. So that's then the next turn, I suppose, in my life, which came to moving out into the community. So, but again, I think in my life I've always had a little bit of an element of limiting beliefs and thinking they can do that, but I can't. So I suppose I stayed in the safe zone a bit again, really. And I joined the continuing healthcare team in the community. To be honest, in the beginning, I never thought I'd adapt. I thought I'd become so institutionalised. How can I possibly do this? But again, it was another lesson of adaptability. So before I knew it, I was I was running well with it. You know, it was an amazing team that I was working with. I mean, you didn't always get the best feedback, because what we did was we decided financial decisions for care, and it's quite an emotive thing for people. And we did, you know, the whole team was amazing and always would go out of the way to try and make sure, you know, the best was done for people. But we were bound by a framework, and that's what we had to work within. So I suppose over a period of a couple of years that I spent with them, I was becoming a bit automated again. It was a comfort zone. I'm not going to lie, you know, I wanted to benefit others, and I felt like I was benefiting others, but I'd kind of stepped into that comfort zone. And I guess, as for many people, the next turning point was COVID. Because
that's been a massive decision maker for so many people, hasn't it? It's really made people think, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? And I do wonder, and I'll come to this in a bit more detail in a moment, but I do wonder sometimes how much there's an energy or there's a force out there that these things happen for a reason, that as a human race, as people, we need these catalysts to change, if that makes sense, wake us up. So yeah, I guess when COVID hit, you know, we didn't really see what was coming, and the initial shock was and worry was with my stepson. He has cystic fibrosis.
Right.
So it's a respiratory condition. So when we heard about it, it was obviously affecting the respiratory system. It was full panic mode, thinking, oh my God, you know, this could be really, really, you know.
Understandably so, yeah.
Yeah. So we were really quite anxious about that. And then rolling on from that, a few weeks later, I had a phone call from my dad, and the bit that I probably haven't mentioned up to now was, just when I was starting out in my nurse training, my mum was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which was another experience within the mental health field, I suppose. And when she was diagnosed, had a manic phase. It was managed really well. We had a family GP at that time. So the manic phase is when the mood becomes quite elated. I mean, some people may, I speak sometimes, though people are aware of it, and it's probably unfair.
Yeah, I mean, I am, but I mean, people listening might not be. To understand why it's called bipolar, or I mean, its old term was manic depression, but you have these deep depressions and mania, and it's like that pendulum swing, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely. And for my mum, I think looking back, and she's very open about it. I've discussed with her being on here today, and she's happy for anything to disclose, because she isn't, you know, quite rightly, she's not ashamed of anything, and it's getting that message out there that, you know, mental health is just the same as physical health. I think we're moving towards that, but it hasn't necessarily been a quick process in it. I don't think it's quite where it could be yet.
Yes.
But yeah, so she that was when she was first diagnosed, and that was got under control, I suppose, you've got very, 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 very quickly. And then for the years in between, it's been extremely well. Yeah, I had a phone call from my dad basically saying something's not right. So, you know, something's not right, you know, with your mum. And he'd not really seen it coming. I think because of COVID, he thought it was just stress, as you would. And because she'd been well for so long, I think myself as well, even as a mental health nurse, I'll hold my hands up. You take it for granted, and you forget, and you kind of put it to the back of your mind. So yeah, I ended up going up to York at that time to kind of support up there, because we were in lockdown. They were supposed to be isolating at that point, but you had to weigh up the risk. I thought, you know, my dad was panicking. You know, my mum was getting quite distressed. So what sort of entailed from there was a few days really where we were trying to get support in to the episode, to keep them at home really, because that feeling of we're in the middle of a pandemic, you know, she probably would benefit from, you know, some proper support in hospitals, as much as it's hard as a mental health nurse to accept that as well, because you think, you know, I should be able to help here.
But also you're too close to it, you're too emotionally involved. It's a different scenario, isn't it, when it is your closest family?
Absolutely. But again, it gave me another huge insight to an area of mental health, that because I hadn't been involved really when she was first diagnosed, and I hadn't really had any experience from bipolar, it was that experience from the inside as well, and seeing it from your mum, then they get better. So knowing my mum as my mum, and then seeing her poorly, you know, it was a real it was a bolt of shock, really, because it was like my mum, but it wasn't my mum, if that makes sense. She was her thoughts were so disordered, and she just couldn't make sense of the world. And the things she was saying and doing were so out of character for my mum. And it was quite scary. It was a real sort of moment of, it maybe takes stock again, I suppose. And she did end up going to hospital, unfortunately. But the fortunate side of that was that it did give her the help she needed, and now she is,
and now she's well again.
Now she's well again. But I suppose moving on from that experience, really, and when you speak about the get a life moment, which I guess is why I've really disclosed that, is I entered sort of a phase of reflection, if that makes sense, really. And I was taking stock of everything. I was thinking, I've been fighting for control over my life and staying in my comfort zone. When life will chuck you out of that without even thinking for a second, you can't control, you can't, what is the benefit in limiting beliefs in this controlling of your life, really? And I was drawn towards all these different theories. And I don't know why. And the strange thing is, I don't know why, but in terms of spirituality, manifesting, meditation. And the more I read, the more I wanted to read more. I think my husband thought I was losing my mind. I'm not going to lie.
Welcome to my world.
But I think now, as time's gone by, he's kind of understanding where that's coming from a bit. But I guess during that time, I really took stock, and I kind of thought, wow, I've really been underestimating myself. I've really been playing down, what we're all capable of, really, and what's out there. And I'm not really religious by background. My family have been Christian, but I've really bought into that vibe. There's energies out there. There's something more than us. There's something more to this. And as I was reading more, I thought, this isn't the woo-woo stuff that I once thought it was. This is grounded in science. This is real stuff. And at that time as well, I think in terms of like synchronicities and things going on in the background, there'd been an opportunity for quite some time from a good friend called Rachael Thompson, who I went to university with to do my nurse training. And she'd worked in social care for many, many years, and she'd worked with dementia, and she saw a different way, basically, of care. And she'd never really took the leap until she met her partner, who was a businessman, who kind of said to her, why aren't you doing this for yourself? And I think it gave her the confidence from the business perspective to think, I can do this. I've got this amazing idea. I know how I want things to be done. And now I've got somebody who's saying to me, I'll support you to set up this business. Let's go for it. So yeah, in 2016, that's what she did. And she set up Unique Homecare services. And after a year or two, we got to chatting, and she was saying, I'd really like to expand this model. Would you like to join me on this journey? And at that time, my beliefs were, I can't do that. I really align with this ethos. It's absolutely amazing what you're doing. I think everything, I think it's fantastic, but no, I couldn't do that. And all these sorts of thoughts of, I couldn't possibly be capable of doing something, of that gravity. So it kind of got put on the back burner, and the ideas kept popping up, and it kind of got put on the back burner. But it was only
popping up and popping up again.
Kept popping
giving
back.
You a little nudge.
And I kept pushing it back down and pushing it aside. And it was only really during those months of reflection that the signs kept coming. And then eventually I thought, why can't I? Why can't I do that? And there was a point where there was a few different little moments that I thought these signs are too much to ignore. And then my husband and I were having a chat in the living room. We were just saying about it, saying, do you think we could go for this? Do you think it's something that we could do? And literally at that moment, a text message popped through from my phone, Michelle, saying, are we going to go for it? And I thought,
there it is. Signs are right there.
And that's the thing, isn't it? And there's so many signs in life. And I think it's easy to ignore them. And for myself, I think sometimes I've been a bit of an overthinker and not living in the moment as much as I could or I should. And I'm on a constant journey of trying to learn about that. It's not just about helping others. I think in order to help others, you need to reflect on yourself as well, don't you, and how you're seeing the world. Yeah, it's a constant journey from that aspect.
So it's called Unique Homecare. So, I mean, you've given me a little bit of background about this. I heard you speak about it. But what is the uniqueness in this model? Because, home care for our elders can get a bit of a bad reputation, can't it? And we've all heard the stories. And so you come along with Unique Homecare. So share a little bit about why is it so unique, this model and this approach?
I think there's a lot of rhetoric within health and social care about being person-centred, about, you know, least restrictive practice and all these sort of things. But I think a lot of it can have a tendency sometimes to be splashed on websites or in manuals, but actually putting it into practice is a different matter. And that happens for different reasons. So it's not for me to sit here and you know, kind of judge others for why that might not happen. But I think sometimes the message can get lost with other pressures. So I guess from the unique home care perspective, we want to see things as a more holistic approach. So where previously care can be seen as a bit of a task-based model, where we're focusing mainly on physical health, time is limited, we're in and out, you know, we're getting things done for people. Our approach is, hang on a minute, you know, we need to start from scratch. We need to build a company where it, first and foremost, the people who are working feel valued. You know, that's at the end of the day, you know, the care team, they are the people who are going to be going out, you know, to the clients, you know, providing that care. And we all know ourselves, if we're not feeling 100% in ourselves, or we're not feeling valued, or we don't feel like we're empowered, it takes its toll. So our ethos really is that everybody in our company works as a team. We all work together, we're all supported, you know, that we support our care team to feel valued, that their ideas are shared. So a big part of the ethos is say, you know, if you've got an idea, if you're out there and you think something will work better, bring it back, let's have a think about it, let's brainstorm how we can make that work. And particularly during COVID, mindfulness, you know, how that could maybe help carers. So I know our manager up in Lancaster, she's trained in mindfulness, and at the moment here, which is where I met yourself through the Mindfulness Network, I'm currently trying to make some links with practitioners in this area and explore ways in which they might be able to help in our team manage their stress and coping. So yeah, it's about taking a different approach, and from the client's perspective as well. I think when we're going back to that tendency to want to do things for people, I think sometimes it can be done from the most caring, nurturing perspective, but actually it's about thinking, hang on a minute, is this what's going to benefit people? So a lot of the model that we're working on comes out of research from Lancaster University in what actually can help slow the progression of dementia. And it may seem quite simple, and it may seem like something that, you know, many people already know, but and stimulation and exercise, and we all know that's good for everybody, but with dementia and home care particularly, they can have that tendency to chuck in a microwave meal or make a sandwich, do something quick and do it for somebody, you know, perhaps not think about, you know, trying to empower somebody to do something for themselves. So, you know, okay, rather than looking at what we can't do, what can they do? You know, what can we do? You know, to whatever level of that ability may be, let's think outside the box. Let's try and, you know, find a different way. So with just for example, with the cooking as a good one. So we're looking at we're working with a dietitian at the moment. So rather than you know, just having your usual microwave meals or sandwiches, how can we be a bit inventive? And we know it's not always easy. And in that environment, if you've got people going in for an hour 4 times a day, there might not be that time on one visit to do it all. But can we work as a team? So can one person prepare some vegetables so that the next person can put that meal together, maybe put it in a slow cooker, and the next person, you know, can share that meal with the client as well. And that is a part of it. The aromas that come from cooking, the experience of sitting down together, the social experience of sharing a meal. It's all these things that add to the richness of life. I think that physical and mental health in conjunction, rather than being seen as 2 separate entities, is so important. So we're looking at prevention, I suppose, before the crisis, if that makes sense. And I think
and it's not like just processing you know, often, and I mean, I could say this because I'm not in the industry, I look in and you hear these things and read these things, and some of it might be embellished and not true, but it's a little bit like I'm just processing a task because it's just a moneymaker. And what you're saying is, no, this is about a real life human being, somebody who has lived a full and joyous life, and they need a little bit more help now. So really thinking about what is the best way of, really engaging with this person so that they get the best out of their care. And, to sit down and eat a meal with somebody, well, that's precious, isn't it? It's really precious to have that social interaction of sharing, breaking bread together, sharing. I mean, it comes from all the major religions in the world, that it's such a meaningful and purposeful thing to break bread together, to sit down and eat a meal together. So, there's something much deeper going on there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think it's also just sort of, developing on that about, seeing care slightly different. I think a lot of people don't think of care as being companionship and helping people to engage in the things that stimulate them and the things that they've enjoyed all life. So, they might have come to a point in their life where they just need that little bit of help and support with that. But it's so meaningful to their day, and just to make a difference to somebody. It's like with our team, part of our training is to say, go in there to every visit thinking, how can I make a difference to this person, and like you say, it's about learning about that individual, because we've all got such rich backgrounds and experiences, and unless you dig underneath that, you never really fully know. And I think particularly with dementia, often it's those past experiences that what people find it easier to interact about, because often it's the new memories that aren't stored. So by actually tapping into all those lovely rich old memories, you can have some really
music as well. I saw a beautiful video on YouTube of a lady with dementia who had been a ballerina. As soon as they started to play the music, her arms started to go, and so she was back there. It was so beautiful.
So powerful. And I think we can underestimate those things. And I think sometimes when people speak about challenging behaviour in dementia, I think, well, is it challenging behaviour? Actually, if we think about it, where's that behaviour coming from? Is it because we haven't understood their world? Because we all have a different outlook, don't we, based on our experience, particularly with dementia. It can be so confusing and so distressing to not be able to recall those things that you once did. And if we just have an understanding of that processing and how we can adapt our interaction to actually fit into their world rather than expecting them to fit into ours. And I think, if somebody's saying something that in our world we think doesn't make sense, but to them it does, within reason, what's the problem with going along with that or distracting? Because sometimes it's the distress that can come from being told and reminded that you're wrong, or reminded that there's something wrong, often lasts longer. The memory of what's happened can go for somebody with dementia, but that feeling of distress stays. So why do we want to cause that? So I think it's just thinking a bit differently, really. And and that's a big part of our training, for our health and wellbeing team members, is to make sure that they have an understanding of that, and they can go out there feeling well equipped to be able to handle those situations, really. And as I say, going back to the diet and nutrition, it's just keeping people well. So I think one of the other dangers is when people get infections, particularly with dementia, and then they go into hospitals. It's such a strange environment, and obviously people in hospital wards are so busy, aren't they? And they don't always have time to sit with somebody, and for many reasons. But that can often lead to a situation where somebody may never return home. They become so unwell, and that then takes a life. And if we can avoid that, if we can put things in place to keep people well at home, that is our ultimate aim, I suppose. Keeping people well at home and supported, longer.
Yes, I can see and hear and feel your passion for this. So what are your aspirations as you move forward? Because obviously this is, for you, a relatively new venture into the world of being self-employed or being a business owner. What are your aspirations for this going forward?
I think our aspirations are just to constantly grow and develop and look for new innovative ways to try and help people. I think rather than staying within old models and getting stuck in old processes, is just to continue to develop. And I know, speaking from our branch up in Lancaster, and we're at a very early stage, but that's already branched out to have an early onset dementia manager, and that was based on the idea that there's a need out there to actually support people at that earlier stage, and by doing that we can actually help to keep people well for longer. We've also opened up an office in Skipton at Broughton Hall, which is an area where they're trying to build up a network of wellness businesses, really. And there's also in the early stages of setting up to maybe do dementia holidays for people living with dementia. They can go with, or maybe even with the carers as well, and be supported by Unique to have a holiday, in a safe environment. So yeah, it's just thinking of different ways, thinking of, you know, what we can do to constantly evolve and constantly find the future, really, and through technology as well. I think technology is a huge thing when you're looking into supporting with people with dementia, and there's lots of things out there that are coming out that can be really, really supportive. So supporting families with how to access them and how that can benefit. But ultimately, I think it's doing it in a way that keeps the ethos as well. I think sometimes if things develop too quickly, I think that's probably why, you know, it's took this time to open this next branch. You know, a lot of care companies, they franchise and they expand ever so quickly, but there can be that risk of it becoming a bit corporate, of it becoming a bit profit orientated. And yes, in a business, profit's always,
of course, you've got to make, that's the point of being in business.
Yeah,
but it's a business with ethos, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not losing that core reason why it came about, and it's making sure that, you know, it's developed in a way that is always at the centre, really, of what we're doing. So yeah, the vision is big, and yeah, of course we'd like to expand. We'd like to, you know, because we want, you know, this model to be available to more people. And I think as I've got into promoting what we're doing, it's been a real eye-opener how many people have actually said, wow, we really need this. And some of the experience that they've shared of care companies, like I say, you think that we've kind of moved on, and I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there that are amazing, so it's not for me to say that there aren't, but I think there's a lot that maybe do, you know, still hold, you know, some values that maybe aren't, you know, where they should be anymore, and more so than we maybe realise. So yeah, it's just about wanting to change that face of care. I think from my perspective, coming from a health background into social care as well, I've really noticed the disparity between the two, which I never fully appreciated before. And I think, you know, when everything was happening during COVID, everyone was clapping for the NHS, weren't they? And nobody seemed to remember social care in that, and the responsibilities of some of the people going out within social care, you know, is amazing. Huge. And it's celebrating, you know, the things that they're doing out there are massive, are absolutely massive, and the difference that they're making is absolutely massive. And I think it often gets unnoticed. And I think social care is often the beginning point of someone's care journey, I guess. When you get to the sort of health level, things have kind of progressed more at that point, I suppose. So actually, if we can invest more and actually put more in at this level, it'll probably take more pressure off the health system in the long term.
Yeah, exactly, because people will be able to stay healthy, safe and happy and well at home longer.
Yeah, massively. And I think as a country, we've got a bit of a tendency to kind of be reactive at the point of crisis, rather than thinking, well, hang on a minute, actually, if we think back and actually look at this from you know, the start point, is there a way that if we actually invest and kind of put a bit of time and effort and in at this earlier stage, maybe we can actually make a difference to this later outcome. And I think that's something, it's conversations that really need to happen. And that is a much bigger conversation.
Yeah, I can see that you could properly get on your soapbox about that one, Rachel.
Yeah, that's a way bigger conversation. And as I say, I'm not here to slate the health system at all. So I think it's amazing, and it's done some amazing things for, you know, me within my life and within my family. But no, I do think
there's opportunities, isn't there? There's opportunities for us to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's been absolutely fascinating hearing about your journey and your own personal experiences, you know, so thank you for sharing those, because I know that people will be inspired by that. And obviously what you're now moving in to do, you know, with a new filter, a new way of looking at, you know, how do we look at social care? How do we, you know, especially with dementia, how do, you know, and there is, dementia seems to be becoming bigger and bigger issue for our, you know, for our culture. So, you know, how do we integrate that into a good life? So yeah, amazing work that you're doing. But before we finish, as I ask all of my guests, I have the question to ask you. What is your top tip for life, Rachel?
Okay. I think for me, from my experience, it's probably looking behind behaviours. I think whatever it may be, whether it's when I've worked, you know, with people living with personality disorder or living with dementia, or just any of us in life, myself included, every behaviour has a function. And I think sometimes if you have the empathy and the compassion and kindness to look behind that behaviour and actually seek to find where that behaviour is coming from, it can really make such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Good advice. Good advice. So thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. It's been my absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.